The cold was a living thing. It crept through layers of leather, wool, and silk, sliding past every defense Lieutenant James Jimmy Caldwell had wrapped around himself. At nearly 6 miles above the earth, the temperature had plunged to 40 degrees below zero. His breath crystallized instantly, forming tiny ice particles that danced in the cramped cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt before vanishing into the thin, oxygen-starved air. Jimmy's gloved hands gripped the control stick with a tension that had nothing to do with the cold. 23 years old, 5 months out of flight school, and this was his first combat mission over enemy territory. Below him, stretched like a silver thread through the morning haze, a formation of 70 B-17 flying fortresses pressed deeper into the heart of Nazi Germany. Their mission: destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Without ball bearings, German tanks would grind to a halt, aircraft would remain grounded, the entire war machine would seize up like an engine without oil. Jimmy's squadron, the 56th Fighter Group, 8 P-47s in all, had one job: keep those bombers alive. Blue Flight, this is Blue Leader. The voice of Captain Marcus Webb crackled through Jimmy's headset, steady and controlled despite the static. Stay tight on the bombers. Jerry knows we're coming. They'll hit us hard today. Jimmy clicked his radio twice in acknowledgement, not trusting his voice. Through his canopy, he could see the other Thunderbolts, massive 7-ton fighters that the Germans had nicknamed Jug, short for Juggernaut. With their bulky radial engines and powerful frames, they looked nothing like the sleek Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs they'd soon face. But what the P-47 lacked in elegance, it made up for in strength. These machines could take punishment that would tear other fighters apart and still bring their pilots home, if the pilots knew what they were doing. Jimmy wasn't sure he did. Back in Texas during training, everything had been controlled, predictable. Mock dogfights against fellow trainees who followed the same rulebook, flew the same patterns, made the same mistakes. His instructors had praised his natural feel for the aircraft, his quick reflexes, his smooth coordination. But those instructors had never faced the Luftwaffe. They'd never stared across the sky at pilots who'd been hunting Allied aircraft since 1939, who'd cut their teeth over Poland and France, who counted their victories not in single digits but in dozens. The Luftwaffe veterans expected easy targets. Green American pilots flying in predictable formations, following doctrine written in peacetime by men who'd never seen combat. And for the first terrible months of the air war over Europe, they'd been right. American losses had been catastrophic. But something had begun to change. Jimmy's training had been different. In the final weeks before deployment, a handful of combat veterans had rotated back from Europe to share what they'd learned in Blood and Fire. They'd thrown out the old tactics, the neat formations and textbook maneuvers. Instead, they'd taught the brutal lessons of survival. Don't be predictable. Don't fly straight. Don't assume anything. Use your speed. Use your altitude. Use surprise. And when you engage, commit completely or break away cleanly. Hesitation will end you. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. The shout exploded through the radio. 6, no, 8 contacts. Focke-Wulf 190s. Jimmy's head snapped left and up. There, emerging from the glare of the sun like sharks rising from deep water, dark shapes dove toward the bomber formation. The German fighters were perfectly positioned, using altitude and solar blindness to mask their approach until the last moment. Classic Luftwaffe tactics. Jimmy felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Blue Flight, this is Blue Leader. 2 and 3, take the left pair. 4 and 5, center group. 6 through 8, you're with me on the right. Execute. The tight formation exploded into organized chaos. 8 Thunderbolts broke in different directions, each pair racing to intercept specific threats before they could reach the vulnerable bombers. Jimmy was Blue 7. His wingman, Lieutenant Danny Rossi, stayed glued to his right wing as they curved upward, engines roaring at full throttle. The massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 behind Jimmy's seat delivered 2,400 horsepower, pushing the 7-ton fighter through the sky with surprising agility. The Focke-Wulfs dove past them, sleek and predatory, their pilots focused entirely on the bombers. They hadn't spotted the climbing Thunderbolts yet. Classic mistake. Veteran or not, target fixation could affect anyone. Jimmy's training took over. Don't think. React. He rolled inverted, pulled the stick back, and let gravity help accelerate the Thunderbolt into a diving turn. The world spun, sky, earth, clouds blurring together, then stabilized as he rolled upright, now diving at tremendous speed directly behind two Focke-Wulfs. His wingman stayed perfectly positioned, covering his blind spots. The lead FW-190 was lining up on a B-17. Jimmy could see the bomber's tail guns firing, tracers arcing through the morning air. The German pilot adjusted slightly, compensating for deflection and closure rate. Experienced, confident, unaware. Jimmy's thumb moved to the trigger. 8 50-caliber machine guns were mounted in his wings, 4 per side, each capable of firing 800 rounds per minute. In training, they'd called the P-47's firepower devastating. Jimmy was about to find out if that assessment was accurate. He breathed out slowly, steadying his aim as the range decreased. 1,200 feet, 1,000, 800. The gun sight pipper settled just ahead of the Focke-Wulf's nose, leading the target perfectly. 600 feet. Jimmy pressed the trigger. The Thunderbolt shuddered as all 8 guns opened fire simultaneously. The sound was overwhelming even through his leather helmet. A thunderous mechanical roar that gave the P-47 its name. Tracers streaked across the gap, and Jimmy saw impacts sparkling along the Focke-Wulf's fuselage and wing root. The German fighter seemed to stagger in midair. Pieces flew off, metal panels, fragments of canopy. Then, suddenly, it snap-rolled left and began spiraling downward, trailing white smoke that quickly turned black. Jimmy's first victory, his first combat, his first. He had no time to process it. The second FW-190 had seen its companion fall and was already braking hard right, the pilot executing a scissors maneuver to force Jimmy into an overshoot. Another textbook response from a veteran pilot. But Jimmy didn't follow. Instead, he pulled up sharply, trading speed for altitude, refusing to enter the turning fight where the more agile Focke-Wulf held the advantage. Another lesson from the combat veterans. Play to your strengths, not your enemies. 7. You've got one on your 6, Danny's voice sharp with urgency. Brake left now. Jimmy slammed the stick left and forward. The Thunderbolt rolled and dove, acceleration forces crushing him into his seat. Behind him, cannon rounds tore through the space he'd occupied a heartbeat earlier. A third FW-190, one he hadn't even seen, had positioned itself for the kill. The world became instinct and reaction. Roll, pull, dive, climb. The massive Thunderbolt danced through the sky with impossible grace, Jimmy's hands and feet working controls through muscle memory trained into reflexes. The German stayed with him, but couldn't quite line up the shot. Jimmy's irregular, unpredictable movements, exactly what the veterans had taught, made him impossible to track cleanly. Then Danny arrived. Jimmy caught a flash of another P-47 streaking past, guns blazing. The pursuing Focke-Wulf broke off immediately, smoke trailing from its engine cowling. "You're clear, 7, Danny called. "Let's reform." Jimmy pulled the Thunderbolt into level flight, scanning the sky. The engagement had scattered across miles of airspace. Below, the bomber formation continued its steady progress toward Schweinfurt, several B-17s trailing smoke but still airborne. Around them, individual dogfights raged. Thunderbolts versus Focke-Wulfs, experience versus innovation, old doctrine versus new tactics. And something remarkable was happening. The Americans weren't being slaughtered. They were holding their own. Some were even winning. The Luftwaffe veterans had expected easy prey. Instead, they'd found opponents who refused to be predictable, who'd learned from the losses that came before, who brought fresh tactics forged from recent pain. Jimmy's hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat despite the cold. His first combat had lasted perhaps 90 seconds, though it felt like hours. And somewhere over Germany, 7 B-17 crews were still alive because of it. Blue flight, this is Blue leader. Reform on me. We're not done yet. The bombers still need us. Jimmy glanced at his fuel gauge, his ammunition counter, then back at the sky. More German fighters would come. They always did. The mission was far from over. But as he turned his Thunderbolt back toward the bomber stream, Jimmy Caldwell felt something shift inside him. The terror hadn't disappeared, but it had changed, transformed into something sharper, something focused. He was no longer just a rookie pilot from Texas. He was a fighter pilot, and he had a job to do. Below, Schweinfurt waited. Above, the October sky stretched endlessly, and somewhere in that vast battlefield of air and cloud and sunlight, the real test was only beginning. The reformation took 3 minutes that felt like 30. Jimmy guided his Thunderbolt back toward Captain Webb's position, his eyes constantly scanning the sky in quadrants: high, low, left, right, behind. The combat veterans had drilled this into them relentlessly. The moment you stop looking is the moment you pass away. In the vast emptiness of the sky, threats could appear from nowhere, closing at combined speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour. Danny Rossi settled into position off Jimmy's right wing, his P-47 showing fresh scarring along the fuselage. Bullet strikes that had torn through aluminum but missed anything vital. The Thunderbolt had earned its reputation for toughness. Jimmy had just witnessed why. "Blue Flight, status check," Captain Webb's voice came through, calmer than any man's should be after aerial combat. "Call in by number." One by one, the pilots responded. Blue 2 through Blue 6 checked in without issue. Blue 4 reported damage to his oil cooler, but confirmed he could continue. Blue 8 didn't respond. "Blue 8, this is Blue Leader. Do you copy?" Silence filled the radio. Webb waited 5 seconds, then tried again. "Tommy, if you can hear me, rock your wings." Nothing. Lieutenant Tommy Harrison, a kid from Ohio who'd bunked next to Jimmy back in Texas, had simply vanished from the sky. No parachute had been spotted. No smoke trail. One moment fighting, the next moment gone, erased as cleanly as chalk from a blackboard. Jimmy felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with altitude. "Understood," Webb said quietly. "Blue Flight, maintain escort position. Stay alert." Intel reported heavy fighter concentrations in this sector. They weren't wrong. The bomber formation had tightened up during the engagement, the big B-17s drawing closer together for mutual protection. Their defensive guns created overlapping fields of fire that could shred any fighter foolish enough to press an attack through the formation's heart. But the edges remained vulnerable, and stragglers, damaged bombers falling behind, were easy prey. Jimmy counted the flying fortresses below. 63. They'd started with 70. 7 had already fallen, taking 70 men with them into the German countryside. Some might have parachuted safely into captivity. Others wouldn't have had time. The mission was barely half complete. "Contacts. 2 o'clock level. Large formation." The shout came from Blue 3, sharp with adrenaline. Jimmy's head snapped right. His breath caught. A swarm of German fighters emerged from a cloud bank 2 miles distant. Not 6 or 8 this time, but 20 or more. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, identifiable by their narrow, angular profiles and distinctive engine cowlings. The Luftwaffe was committing everything to stop this raid. "Blue Flight, this is Blue Leader. We're outnumbered 3-1. New tactics. We're going in pairs. Use speed and altitude. Hit and run. Do not get drawn into sustained turning fights. Acknowledge." 7 clicks answered. 7 pilots understanding that the old rules no longer applied. Against such numbers, the textbook approach, maintaining formation, coordinating maneuvers, would simply get them eliminated quickly. Instead, they'd employ the new doctrine: aggressive, unpredictable, asymmetric. The Luftwaffe expected them to fight conventionally. They wouldn't. "Blue 7 and 6, you're a pair. Take the northern elements. Go high. Come down fast. 1 pass, then extend." "Clear?" "Clear, Blue Leader," Jimmy responded, his voice steadier than he felt. Blue 6, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, one of only 3 female pilots in the fighter groups, though officially she was listed as a test pilot to satisfy regulations, clicked her acknowledgement. Jimmy and Sarah had trained together, flown together, trusted each other implicitly. If he had to face 20 German fighters, there was no one else he'd rather have on his wing. The 2 Thunderbolts climbed aggressively, trading speed for altitude. Below, the German formation split into attack elements, vectoring toward different sections of the bomber stream. Coordinated, professional, deadly. Jimmy reached 29,000 feet and leveled off, the Messerschmitts now 3,000 feet below. Sarah positioned herself perfectly, close enough to support, far enough to avoid collision if things went chaotic. 6. We're taking the trailing element. 4 bandits. I'll engage the leader, you cover the wingman, on my mark. Jimmy's hands were steady now, his breathing controlled. Fear had transformed into focus. The P-47 nosed over, gravity adding to engine power as the massive fighter accelerated downward. The indicated airspeed climbed rapidly. 300 knots, 350, 400. The Thunderbolt was built for this. Diving attacks that leveraged mass and power into overwhelming speed. The Messerschmitts below were focused on the bombers, their pilots calculating intercept angles and closure rates. Classic target fixation, the same mistake that had nearly cost Jimmy his life 15 minutes earlier. "Mark!" Jimmy's Thunderbolt screamed downward like a stooping falcon. The lead Messerschmitt grew rapidly in his gun sight, 200 feet, 900, 600. He waited until 400 feet, compensating for the extreme deflection angle, then pressed the trigger. 8 streams of 50 caliber rounds converged on the German fighter. Impacts sparkled across its wing and tail section. The Messerschmitt rolled violently left, its pilot reacting with impressive speed, but the damage was done. White coolant began streaming from the engine, the characteristic signature of a mortally wounded aircraft. Jimmy didn't follow. He kept diving, speed now exceeding 450 knots, using velocity to extend away from any potential counterattack. Behind him, Sarah's guns blazed as she engaged the wingman. Then she too continued downward, refusing to be drawn into a turning engagement. The tactic worked. By the time the remaining Messerschmitts could react, both Thunderbolts were a mile away, using their speed advantage to reposition for another attack. The German pilots faced a choice: pursue the American fighters or continue toward the bombers. They chose the bombers, their primary mission. It was exactly what Jimmy and Sarah wanted. They climbed again, repositioning, preparing for another high-speed pass. Hit and run, disrupt, damage, survive. 2 more diving attacks followed over the next 8 minutes. Each time, the Thunderbolt struck from altitude, used speed to compensate for numbers, then extended before the Germans could coordinate a response. It wasn't elegant or honorable in the old fighter pilot tradition, but it was effective, and it kept the bombers alive. By 10:45, the German fighter formations began withdrawing, their fuel states and ammunition reaching critical levels. The bomber stream continued its relentless advance toward Schweinfurt, now only 20 miles from target. Smoke trails marked where aircraft, both Allied and German, had fallen from the sky, but the majority of the flying fortresses remained airborne. Jimmy's fuel gauge showed half tanks. His ammunition counters indicated roughly 60% remaining. His body ached from the sustained high-G maneuvers, and his flight suit was completely soaked despite the freezing temperature. But he was alive. Sarah was alive. And below them, bomber crews were alive because of what they'd done. Blue flight. This is Blue Leader. Well done. Schweinfurt dead ahead. Bombers are beginning their approach. Stay alert. Flak concentrations are going to be heavy. Maintain altitude and keep scanning. Jerry might have one more surprise for us. Jimmy looked down at the German city emerging through the haze. Even from 26,000 feet, he could see the industrial complexes, the rail yards, the ball-bearing factories that were the entire reason for this mission. In minutes, hundreds of tons of high explosives would rain down on those targets. Buildings would collapse. Equipment would be destroyed. And people, German workers, perhaps women and children in nearby neighborhoods, would face the same terror that London had endured during the Blitz. War had no clean victories, only necessary ones. The first bomber group reached its initial point and began the final approach. Immediately, black smudges began appearing in the sky around them. Anti-aircraft fire, 80mm shells programmed to detonate at specific altitudes, filling the air with shrapnel. The flak batteries knew the bomber's altitude precisely and adjusted accordingly. The B-17s flew straight and level, holding course despite the explosions blooming around them. Bombardiers needed stable platforms for accurate drops. Evasive action meant missed targets, so they flew through the storm of metal, trusting their armor and their luck. 2 flying fortresses staggered as flak found them. One began trailing fire from its No. 3 engine. The other simply broke apart, its fuselage severed by a direct hit. Tiny figures tumbled from the wreckage, parachutes blossoming, then drifting down toward captivity or worse. Jimmy forced himself to watch. This was the cost. This was reality. Then bombs began falling, hundreds of them, released in sequence, creating a cascading waterfall of destruction that plummeted toward the industrial heart of Schweinfurt. The results wouldn't be visible from this altitude, but the mission planners would assess the damage from reconnaissance photos. Success would be measured in tons of explosives delivered and factories destroyed. The human cost would be calculated separately. Blue Flight, this is Blue Leader. Bombers are off target and turning for home. We're escorting them back to the channel. Form up and prepare for the return leg. Stay sharp. They'll try to hit us again on the way out. The bomber formation completed its turn, heading west now, back toward France, toward England, toward home. The P-47s reformed around them, guardian angels written in metal and determination. Jimmy glanced at his compass heading, then at the fuel gauge again. They had enough to make it back. Probably. The October sky stretched endlessly ahead. Somewhere beyond the horizon, past occupied France, past the English Channel, safety waited. But between here and there lay 300 miles of hostile territory, countless German fighters, and the grinding certainty that this mission wasn't finished. Not yet. Jimmy settled into formation position, his eyes resuming the constant scan pattern. Sarah flew steady on his wing. Below, 61 bombers, all that remained of the original 70, pressed westward. They'd survived the target. Now they had to survive going home. The return journey revealed war's true face. Jimmy had expected the Germans to swarm them immediately after leaving Schweinfurt, to throw everything they had at the wounded bomber formation limping westward. Instead, an eerie quiet settled over the sky. The only sounds were the steady rumble of his Pratt & Whitney engine and the occasional radio check from Captain Webb. The silence felt wrong. Predatory. Below, the German countryside rolled past. Forests, farmland, small villages that looked peaceful from altitude. It was strange to think that people down there were living relatively normal lives, eating breakfast, going to work, raising children. The war existed in a different dimension for them, something read about in newspapers rather than experienced at 400 miles per hour with tracers burning past your canopy. Jimmy's fuel gauge showed just under half tanks now. They'd burned through reserves faster than planned during the combat over Schweinfurt. Quick mental calculation. Roughly 45 minutes of flight time remaining at current consumption. The English Channel was still 30 minutes away, and that assumed no further engagements, no high-speed maneuvers, no emergency power settings. It would be close. Blue 7, this is Blue 6. Sarah's voice came through his headset. Professional, but with an undertone of concern. I'm showing fuel state at 42%. How's your situation? Similar, Jimmy replied. We'll make it. Just needs to stay quiet for another. Bandits, 6 o'clock low, climbing fast. The shout from Blue 3 shattered the calm. Jimmy's head snapped around, searching the sky behind and below. There, 6 Messerschmitt Bf-109s rising from lower altitude, their pilots having shadowed the formation from beneath, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Patient, calculating, experienced. These weren't young pilots making aggressive attacks. These were hunters who understood that wounded prey grew weaker with time, that fuel states diminished, that exhaustion degraded reaction times. They'd waited until the Americans were most vulnerable, then launched their assault. Blue Flight, maintain escort position, Captain Webb ordered. Blue 5 and 6, you're the reaction element. Engage and break them off the bombers. Everyone else cover the stragglers. 3 B-17s had fallen behind the main formation, their damaged engines unable to maintain formation speed. They flew in a loose triangle, perhaps a mile behind the others, their gunners watching the approaching Messerschmitts with grim determination. The German fighters ignored the main formation entirely, vectoring straight for the stragglers. Easier targets. Isolated. Vulnerable. Sarah's Thunderbolt rolled and dove, Jimmy following instantly. Blue 5, Lieutenant Marcus Kane, descended from the opposite side, the three P-47s converging to intercept before the Messerschmitts could reach the bombers. The geometry of the engagement unfolded in Jimmy's mind like a tactical problem. The Germans had altitude and position. The Americans had speed and desperation. 6 against 3. Poor odds, but the stragglers had no other protection. 6, we're going for separation, Jimmy called. Draw them away from the bombers. Force them to choose between us and the heavies. Copy that, 7. On your wing. The two Thunderbolts swept past the trailing B-17s, placing themselves between the bombers and the climbing Messerschmitts. It was a deliberate challenge, an invitation the German pilots couldn't ignore. Fighter pilots, regardless of nationality, shared certain instincts. Honor demanded they engage. The lead Messerschmitt accepted, rolling toward Jimmy's Thunderbolt. The others followed, the formation splitting. 3 pursuing Jimmy and Sarah, 3 continuing toward the bombers where Blue 5 would have to face them alone. Jimmy didn't have time to worry about Kane. He had his own problems. The pursuing Messerschmitts were fast, agile, and piloted by men who'd survived years of combat. They wouldn't make rookie mistakes. They wouldn't be predictable. And they had the fuel reserves to press the fight. Jimmy did the unexpected. Instead of diving away or climbing for altitude, he turned directly into the attackers, closing the distance at a combined speed exceeding 600 miles per hour. The maneuver, called a head-on pass, was considered reckless by traditional doctrine. But the new tactics embraced calculated risks. The lead Messerschmitt's wings sparkled as its pilot opened fire early, trying to score hits before the closure became too violent. Tracers streaked past Jimmy's canopy, some passing so close he could hear them over the engine noise, a strange ripping sound that made his skin crawl. He waited. 3 seconds. 2. 1. At 800 feet separation, Jimmy pressed his trigger. All 8 guns fired, the Thunderbolt shuddering from recoil. The Messerschmitt and P-47 raced toward each other through a tunnel of converging tracers, 2 pilots gambling their lives on aim and nerve. Impacts flashed across the Messerschmitt's cowling and wing root. The German fighter snap-rolled right, breaking off the attack, trailing white smoke. Jimmy pulled up sharply, the negative G-forces lifting him against his harness as the Messerschmitt flashed past beneath him, missing collision by perhaps 50 feet. No time to assess damage. The second German fighter was already maneuvering for position, its pilot demonstrating impressive skill as he anticipated Jimmy's recovery and positioned accordingly. But Sarah was there. Her Thunderbolt dove from above, guns hammering, forcing the Messerschmitt into defensive maneuvers. The German pilot broke hard left, sacrificing his attack angle to avoid Sarah's fire. 7, check 6. Sarah's warning came with urgency. The third Messerschmitt had circled behind, patient and precise. Jimmy rolled right and pulled, the Thunderbolt responding with surprising agility for such a heavy aircraft. G-forces crushed him into his seat as the fighter curved through the sky, trying to deny the German pilot a clean shot. Cannon rounds passed through the space he'd occupied a heartbeat earlier. The Messerschmitt pilot was good. Very good. Adjusting his aim, anticipating Jimmy's movements, staying in position despite the violent maneuvering. Jimmy's fuel gauge was dropping rapidly. High-power settings consumed fuel at enormous rates. The longer this engagement continued, the less likely they'd make it home. He needed to end this quickly. An idea formed. Desperate, potentially disastrous, but possibly effective. The Thunderbolt had one significant advantage over the Messerschmitt: mass and structural strength. The P-47 could survive dives that would tear other fighters apart. Jimmy shoved the stick forward and dove. Straight down, engine roaring, airspeed increasing rapidly. 350 knots, 400, 450. The airframe began vibrating, protesting the stress. Warning lights flickered on the instrument panel. The Messerschmitt followed. Its pilot probably assumed Jimmy was fleeing, breaking off the engagement. A reasonable interpretation. Wrong interpretation. At 18,000 feet, Jimmy pulled. Hard. The control stick came back to his chest, G-forces slamming into him like a physical blow. His vision grayed at the edges, blood draining from his head. The Thunderbolt's wings groaned under stress that would have failed lighter aircraft, but held. The recovery brought him out heading almost directly opposite his original course, now climbing back toward the fight at tremendous speed. The Messerschmitt pilot, committed to his dive and unable to match the Thunderbolt's brutal pullout, shot past below. By the time he could recover and reposition, Jimmy had altitude and energy advantage. Sarah had kept the other two Germans occupied, her Thunderbolt dancing through the sky with remarkable grace. But she was running low on ammunition and options. 6, break right, Jimmy called. Sarah rolled right immediately, trusting without question. Jimmy's diving attack caught one of the Messerschmitts completely off guard, his guns finding the target before the German pilot could react. The fighter staggered, pieces flying off, then entered a spin toward the earth below. The remaining two Messerschmitts broke off, their pilots recognizing that the tactical situation had shifted unfavorably. They'd lost 2 aircraft and damaged a third while achieving nothing. Professional pilots knew when to disengage. Jimmy let them go. He had neither the fuel nor the ammunition for pursuit. Blue 6, Blue 7, status? Captain Webb's voice came through. 7 is intact, Jimmy managed, breathing hard. Fuel critical, ammunition depleted. 6 is similar, Sarah added. We need to head for the channel immediately. Understood. Blue 5 reports 2 bombers lost, but the third made it through. Reform on the main group. We're setting course direct to England. No more detours. Jimmy turned westward, his eyes finding Sarah's Thunderbolt. She waved through her canopy, a simple gesture that somehow communicated exhaustion, relief, and mutual respect simultaneously. The bomber formation appeared ahead, smaller now. 58 B-17s remained from the original 70. 12 aircraft gone. 120 men at minimum, possibly more. But 58 had survived. Nearly 600 crew members would see England again because of what the fighter escorts had done. The French coast appeared on the horizon 20 minutes later. The most beautiful sight Jimmy had ever seen. Beyond it, the gray waters of the English Channel stretched toward home. His fuel gauge showed less than 20%. Warning lights glowed amber on the instrument panel. The Thunderbolt had given everything, and so had he. But they'd made it. The formation crossed the channel at minimum altitude, conserving every drop of fuel. The white cliffs of Dover emerged from the mist, and Jimmy felt something break inside him, not collapse, but release. Tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since dawn finally unwound. Blue Flight, this is Blue Leader. Well done. We'll land at Debden. Tower frequency 121.5. Call the field in sequence and follow standard approach. We did good work today. Jimmy clicked his acknowledgement, too tired for words. Below, England appeared. Green fields, small villages, roads with vehicles traveling peacefully from place to place. No flak, no fighters, no one trying to end his life. Just home. Debden Airfield appeared ahead, its runways stretching like welcoming arms. One by one, the Thunderbolts descended, gear lowering, flaps extending. Jimmy's landing was far from textbook. He bounced twice before settling. But he didn't care. The P-47 rolled to a stop on the taxiway. Jimmy shut down the engine, and sudden silence enveloped him. After hours of constant noise, the quiet felt almost supernatural. His hands were shaking again. Now that the adrenaline was fading, reality reasserted itself. He'd been in combat. He'd taken lives. He'd nearly lost his own. And tomorrow, he'd have to do it all again. A ground crew member appeared at his wing, giving the thumbs up. Jimmy opened the canopy, cold October air flooding the cockpit, and carefully climbed out. His legs barely supported him. The debriefing room smelled of coffee, cigarette smoke, and exhaustion. 12 pilots sat scattered across wooden chairs that had seen better days, each man lost in his own thoughts while intelligence officers collected mission data with methodical efficiency. Maps covered the walls, marked with colored pins showing bomber routes, fighter patrol zones, and known German airfield locations. Someone had circled Schweinfurt in red, with handwritten notes documenting the day's raid. 70 bombers dispatched, 58 returned, 12 lost. Estimated 300-plus German fighters engaged. Jimmy stared at those numbers, trying to reconcile the cold statistics with the chaos he'd lived through. 12 bombers lost translated to a minimum of 120 men, dead, captured, or missing. Each one had been a person with a name, a family, dreams of going home. Now they were simply percentages in a mission report. Captain Webb stood at the front of the room, his flight suit still showing sweat stains despite the cool evening air. He looked older than he had that morning, not in years, but in the way combat aged men from the inside out. "Gentlemen," Webb began, his voice carrying the weight of command and something deeper. "Today, we accomplished our mission. The bombers reached their target, delivered their payload, and a majority returned safely. Intelligence confirms significant damage to the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt." He paused, letting that sink in. Strategic success. Tactical victory. But we paid a price. Lieutenant Harrison did not return. His fate is currently unknown. We've lost a good pilot and a good man. The room stayed silent. No one looked at Tommy's empty chair. Webb continued. "What happened today represents something important. The Luftwaffe came at us with veteran pilots, superior numbers, and home field advantage. By traditional assessment, we should have been overwhelmed, but we weren't. You know why?" He looked around the room, making eye contact with each pilot. "Because you didn't fight the way they expected. You used speed instead of turning fights. You attacked from unexpected angles. You refused to be predictable. The new tactics worked. And more importantly, you proved that experience isn't everything. Innovation, adaptability, and courage can overcome veteran advantage." Jimmy felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. Pride, perhaps, but tempered with the knowledge of what it had cost. "The Luftwaffe veterans expected easy targets," Webb said. "They got a fight instead. That's the message we send every time we fly. That's how we win this war. Not by matching their experience, but by changing the rules of engagement." An intelligence officer stepped forward with a clipboard. "Confirmed claims for the day. Blue Flight is credited with 7 enemy aircraft destroyed, 4 probable, 3 damaged. Individual credits will be assessed based on gun camera footage and witness statements. 7 destroyed." Jimmy's mind did the math automatically. 7 German pilots who wouldn't fly tomorrow. 7 families who'd received telegrams. The enemy, yes, but still human beings who'd woken up that morning not knowing it would be their last day alive. War made killers of everyone it touched. "Dismissed," Webb said. "Get some food, get some rest. There's another mission briefing at 06 Mile tomorrow. We do this again." The pilots filed out slowly, their movements stiff and mechanical. Jimmy's body ached in places he hadn't known existed. His back hurt from the G-forces, his hands were raw inside his gloves, and his head pounded from hours of oxygen deprivation and stress. Outside, the October evening had settled over the airfield. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Mechanics worked on the flight line, repairing damaged aircraft, replacing guns, refueling tanks for tomorrow's operations. The war machine never stopped. Sarah found Jimmy standing near the dispersal area, watching ground crews patch bullet holes in his Thunderbolt's wing. She'd changed out of her flight suit into standard uniform, though regulations still required her to maintain the fiction that she was a test and evaluation pilot, rather than combat aircrew. "Hell of a first mission," she said, lighting a cigarette and offering him one. Jimmy shook his head. "Don't smoke." "You might start." She exhaled slowly, watching the smoke drift upward. "They all do eventually." They stood in silence for a moment, Two people who'd shared something that couldn't be explained to those who hadn't experienced it. "You saved my life today," Jimmy said quietly. "Multiple times." Sarah shrugged. "That's the job. You did the same for me. And for those bomber crews. That's what makes it worth it." "Does it get easier? Everything?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than her 24 years. "No. It gets familiar. You learn to function with the fear instead of in spite of it. You develop reflexes that bypass conscious thought. But easy? Never. How many missions have you flown?" Today was number 47. She took another drag. 47 times I've gone up. 47 times I've come back. I've watched 11 pilots from my original training class not come back. Good pilots, smart pilots, lucky pilots, until they weren't. Jimmy absorbed that. "Why do you keep flying?" "Because someone has to. Because those bomber crews need us. Because every mission I survive means I'm better trained for the next one, which increases my chances of surviving that one too. And because..." She paused, searching for words. "Because I'm good at this. Not bragging, just fact. I'm a good combat pilot. Walking away would mean someone less capable takes my place, and they might not come back. That's not acceptable to me." A jeep approached, carrying more pilots returning from debriefing. Danny Rossi climbed out, spotted Jimmy, and headed over. "Caldwell! You magnificent maniac!" Danny's energy seemed inexhaustible despite the day's ordeal. "That head-on pass? Absolutely insane. I thought you were going to collide with that 109. "So did I," Jimmy admitted. "But you didn't. That's the difference between us and them. We're willing to try things they'd never consider because their doctrine won't allow it. They've been fighting the same way since 1939. We're writing new rules every mission." Danny clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good today, kid. Real good." A staff car pulled up near the operations building, and a brigadier general stepped out, unusual for a forward airfield at this hour. The pilots instinctively straightened, watching as the general conferred with Captain Webb. After a brief conversation, Webb approached the group. "Gentlemen, General Patterson has authorized me to share preliminary assessment of today's raid. The strike on Schweinfurt achieved its objectives. Ball-bearing production is estimated to be reduced by 60% for the next several months. That means fewer German tanks, fewer aircraft, fewer weapons reaching the front lines." He paused, his expression grave. The cost across all groups was significant. Of the 291 bombers that participated in today's raid, 60 did not return. 600 men, gone. But the strategic impact justifies the losses from command's perspective. We hurt them badly today. 60 bombers. 600 men. Jimmy felt the weight of those numbers pressing down on him. "However," Webb continued, "today also proved that our new fighter tactics work. Casualty rates among escorted bomber formations were significantly lower than unescorted. Your efforts directly saved hundreds of lives. Command is implementing these tactics across all fighter groups immediately." So that was the legacy of this day. Not just the destruction they'd caused, but the tactics they'd validated. Other pilots would learn from what Blue Flight had done, would adopt the aggressive, unpredictable approach that had kept them alive. Tommy Harrison's sacrifice, the 58 bombers that made it home, the 7 German fighters destroyed. All of it would ripple forward, changing how the air war was fought. That was what veterans knew. That every mission mattered. That survival required constant adaptation. That the old ways would fail against opponents who refused to be predictable. The Luftwaffe veterans had expected easy kills. Instead, they discovered that rookie American pilots armed with superior tactics and the willingness to use them could turn the expected slaughter into something very different. An even fight. A winnable fight. "Get some rest," Webb said. "Tomorrow we fly again. And the day after that. And every day until this war is over. But now they know we're here, and we're not going to make it easy for them." The group dispersed, pilots heading toward the mess hall or their quarters. Jimmy walked slowly across the airfield, his body moving on autopilot while his mind processed everything. He'd survived his first combat mission. He'd faced veteran German pilots and come home. He'd learned lessons that would keep him alive in the missions to come, if luck stayed with him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new opportunities to either succeed or fail. But tonight, he was alive. Sarah was alive. Danny was alive. The mission was complete. And somewhere over the channel, the sun had finally set, marking the end of October 14th, 1943. A day that would be remembered as one of the costliest air battles of the war, and one of the most important. Jimmy reached his quarters and collapsed onto his bunk without undressing. Sleep came quickly, though his dreams were filled with the sound of engines, the flash of tracers, and the memory of Tommy Harrison's empty chair. Outside, the night was filled with the sounds of aircraft being prepared for the next day's operations. Ground crews worked under portable lights, their hammering and riveting a constant reminder that the war continued regardless of exhaustion or loss. By dawn, the Thunderbolts would be ready. The bombers would be loaded. The intelligence officers would have new targets identified, and the pilots would climb back into their cockpits and do it all again. Because that's what veterans did. They adapted. They persevered. They fought. And slowly, mission by mission, they changed the war. The rookie American pilots who'd arrived with superior tactics had proven something crucial that October day. Experience could be overcome by innovation, numbers could be countered by strategy, and the expected outcome could be changed by those willing to rewrite the rules. The Luftwaffe veterans had learned that lesson the hard way. They'd expected easy kills and found worthy opponents instead. And tomorrow, the lesson would be taught again.